I'm Emma, 29, female, and my entire family just voted to kick me out of Christmas dinner. It wasn't a quiet shunning or a forgotten invitation. It was a formal democratic vote, held in the family group chat, complete with a poll created by my Aunt Carol. I watched the little blue checkmarks of assent appear one by one, each one feeling like a small, sharp stone being thrown directly at my heart. The final tally was 12 to 1. The one, of course, being me. The 12 included my own mother and father. To an outsider, this might seem like an unbelievable escalation over a single disagreement. But in my family, it was simply the logical conclusion of a dynamic that had been simmering for my entire life. My family doesn't operate on love and acceptance. It operates on a strict, unspoken hierarchy, and at the top, sitting on a throne of judgment and passive aggression, is my Aunt Carol. Carol is my father's older sister, and she has always carried herself with the air of someone who cracked the code to life, while the rest of us were still struggling to read the instructions. Her success was in real estate, a field she entered with a substantial loan from my grandfather that she conveniently refers to as a small vote of confidence. Her life is a curated collection of things meant to signify importance: a large house in a gated community, a luxury SUV, and two children who were engineered from birth to attend Ivy League schools. The currency in Carol's world is appearance, and anything that threatens the perfect family portrait is treated not as a difference of opinion, but as an act of rebellion. I have been a quiet rebel my entire life, it seems. My first major transgression was choosing to go to art school. I remember the day I told the family I'd been accepted into a prestigious design program. I was beaming, my acceptance letter clutched in my hand. My mom and dad gave me a hesitant, supportive hug, but the enthusiasm in the room was sucked out the moment Carol cleared her throat. "Well, that's creative, Emma," she'd said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "But what's the actual plan? Will you be able to get a real job with that? Your cousin Mark is pre-law at Georgetown. The starting salaries are just tremendous." The implication was clear. My path was frivolous, a hobby, while Mark's was serious and respectable. My father, to his credit, tried to defend me. "Now, Carol, Emma is very talented. Graphic design is a big field." Carol just waved a dismissive hand. Of course, it's just so important to be practical. I'd hate to see her struggle." From that day on, my career as a graphic designer was never referred to as a career. It was Emma's little art thing or her computer drawings. Every success I had landing a major client, winning a design award, was met with a polite, vacant smile and a swift change of subject to one of her son's latest, tremendous accomplishments. Her judgment wasn't reserved for me alone. She treated her own brother, my father, with a similar level of condescending disappointment. My dad is a high school history teacher, a kind and gentle man who loves his job. He doesn't make a fortune, but he's happy and respected by his students. I'll never forget one of Grandpa's birthday parties a few years ago. We were all leaving at the same time, and my parents got into their modest, reliable sedan. Carol, walking toward her gleaming black SUV, stopped and looked at their car. "Oh, David," she sighed, loud enough for half the family to hear. "Are you still driving this thing? You work so hard. You deserve something that doesn't scream, 'I've given up.'" My father's face fell. He just smiled weakly and said, "It gets us from A to B, Carol." But I saw the flicker of shame in his eyes, and I felt a hot surge of anger on his behalf. It was Carol's specialty, coating an insult in a thin veneer of concern, making you feel small while she maintained the moral high ground. The only person who seemed immune to Carol's influence was my grandpa Arthur. He was the patriarch, the one whose house we all gathered in for every holiday. He was a man of few words, a retired carpenter who had built his own home with his own two hands. He would sit in his worn leather armchair during family gatherings, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. While Carol commanded the room with her loud opinions, Grandpa commanded it with his silence. A single raised eyebrow from him could stop Carol mid-sentence. She respected his authority, but I always felt she also resented it. He was the one person whose approval she couldn't buy or bully into submission. He and I had a quiet bond. He never asked about my salary or my 5-year plan. He'd call me and ask what I was designing, his voice full of genuine curiosity. "Show me that logo you made for the coffee shop," he'd say when I visited. "Explain to me why you chose that color." He saw the value in my work, the passion behind it, and in a family that prized practicality above all else, that quiet validation was my anchor. This history, this long-simmering stew of judgment, condescension, and my own quiet defiance was the tinder. The spark that finally set it all ablaze was my cousin Chloe. And when the fire started, I learned that the people I thought would help me douse the flames, my own parents, were the ones holding the gasoline. The beginning of the end happened on a gray, drizzly Sunday in late November. It was an impromptu family lunch at my parents' house, the kind of gathering that happens when everyone is vaguely bored and feels an obligation to see each other before the holiday madness begins. The air was thick with the smell of roast chicken and the low hum of family chatter. I was seated on the sofa, scrolling through my phone, trying to remain pleasantly invisible. My cousin Chloe, who had just turned 19, was the center of attention, and not in a good way. Chloe is a sweet, slightly shy girl with a passion for baking that bordered on artistry. Her dream wasn't a corner office or a fancy degree. It was a small, cozy bake shop with a pink-striped awning where she could sell cupcakes and elaborate, beautiful cakes. Aunt Carol had cornered her near the fireplace. "A pastry chef," Carol said, her voice carrying across the room. It had that familiar tone of feigned curiosity that was really just the wind-up for a lecture. "Chloe, darling, that's a lovely hobby. But what about college? Your mother told me you have wonderful grades. You could do anything you want." Chloe, who hated confrontation, shrank a little. I really love baking, Aunt Carol. I've been looking at some great culinary schools." "Culinary school," Carol repeated the words as if they were a foreign delicacy she found distasteful. "And what does that cost? For a certificate to bake cookies? It just seems like a step backward. Your brother is on the dean's list at the state university studying business. That's a future. Baking is what you do on a Saturday afternoon." Another aunt chimed in. "Carol's right, honey, it's a tough business. Most restaurants fail. You're so smart, you shouldn't limit yourself." I watched Chloe's face crumble. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally, for someone to rescue her. She looked at her own mother, my aunt, who just gave a weak, apologetic shrug, completely steamrolled by Carol's certainty. Chloe's gaze then fell on my parents, who were suddenly fascinated by the patterns on their dinner plates. No one was coming to save her. My own history of being on the receiving end of these career consultations began to bubble up inside me. I saw myself at 19, trying to defend my passion for art. I felt that old, familiar sting of being told your dreams were not practical, not worthy. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, firm click of resolve. I wasn't going to sit there and watch them do to her what they had done to me for a decade. I put my phone down, stood up, and walked over to the fireplace. I put a gentle hand on Chloe's shoulder, and she looked up at me with wide, grateful eyes. "Actually, Aunt Carol," I began, my voice even and calm, "Chloe has already started her own business in a way." Carol turned her sharp gaze on me. "What are you talking about, Emma?" "Her Instagram account," I said, looking at Chloe with a smile. "She has over 10,000 followers who watch her decorate cakes. She gets requests from people all over the city. Last month, she made a wedding cake for a friend of a friend, and they paid her $500 for it. That's more than a hobby. That's talent, and it's a legitimate business." The room went quiet. You could hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece. Carol's smile became thin and tight. "Well, isn't that resourceful? Selling cakes on the internet. How very modern." The condescension in her voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. "It is," I said, refusing to back down. "And being a pastry chef is an incredibly skilled profession. It requires artistry, chemistry, precision. Just like any other trade. It's certainly more valuable than getting a prestigious degree in something you have no passion for, only to end up miserable in a job you hate." The last part hung in the air, a direct missile aimed at the core of her entire belief system. I hadn't raised my voice, but the challenge was unmistakable. I had not only defended Chloe, I had questioned the very definition of success that Carol had built her identity around. Her face, for a fleeting second, was a mask of pure fury. Her cheeks flushed a dull red. She had been publicly contradicted, her authority questioned in front of the entire family. She, who was used to her word being law, had been told she was wrong by her artistic niece who designed computer drawings. She recovered quickly, smoothing over her expression with a cold, artificial calm. "Well, Emma," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "you've certainly made your point. It's clear you have very strong feelings about passion." She turned away from me then, dismissing me completely, and the conversation in the room awkwardly sputtered back to life. But the damage was done. A line had been crossed. I had disrupted the family harmony, and in my family that was the greatest sin of all. As I sat back down, I felt a strange mix of pride and dread. I had done the right thing, I knew it. But I also knew with absolute certainty that Aunt Carol would not let it go. There would be consequences. I just had no idea how swift and brutal they would be. The drive home from my parents' house was silent and tense. My mom stared out the passenger window, while my dad gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The unspoken tension was a third person in the car. I wanted them to say something, anything, to tell me I did the right thing or even to scold me for starting trouble. But they said nothing. Their silence was a verdict in itself. "You know Carol didn't appreciate that," my mom finally said, her voice small, as we pulled into my apartment's parking lot. "Chloe didn't appreciate being humiliated in front of everyone," I countered, my voice sharper than I intended. "Someone had to stand up for her." "That's not your place, Emma," my dad said, turning to look at me. His face was weary. "You know how Carol gets. Sometimes it's just better to let things go, for the sake of peace." "For the sake of Carol's peace, you mean," I muttered as I got out of the car. I didn't wait for a reply, just slammed the door and walked away. The gap between my definition of peace and theirs felt like a chasm. The official declaration of war arrived 2 days later. I was at my desk, working on a branding project for a new client, when my phone buzzed with a notification from our family's group chat, Family Circle. The title itself was a joke. It felt more like a gladiator pit. The message was from Aunt Carol. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read it. "Hello everyone," it began, deceptively pleasant. "In light of the unfortunate and deeply uncomfortable scene at David and Sarah's house on Sunday, I feel we need to address something. The holiday season is meant to be a time of joy, harmony, and respect. It is not a time for aggressive confrontations or for younger members to disrespect their elders." Emma's behavior was incredibly disruptive and created a tense environment for everyone, especially poor Chloe, who was put in a terrible position. I stared at the words, my blood running cold. She was twisting it, reframing her bullying as my aggression. She was making me the villain and herself the protector of poor Chloe. The message continued. "I believe that family harmony is paramount, and sometimes, to protect that harmony, difficult decisions must be made. Christmas dinner is a sacred tradition for us, and I worry that Emma's current combative attitude will ruin it for everyone. Therefore, I am proposing we take a vote. I believe it would be best for everyone if Emma did not attend Christmas dinner this year, to give her some time to reflect on her behavior and the importance of family unity." And then, underneath the text, was the feature I never thought I'd see used for my own excommunication: a poll. Should Emma be uninvited from Christmas dinner this year to preserve family peace? Oh yes. No. I felt sick. My hands were trembling so badly I had to put my phone down on the desk. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. This was something from a bad movie, not something a real family did. I waited, praying no one would respond, that they would see how insane this was. Then the first notification popped up. Carol voted yes. Of course, the second followed a minute later. Uncle Mark voted yes. He was Carol's husband, her loyal soldier, then another. Cousin Jason voted yes. Carol's son. One by one, the yes votes trickled in. Aunts, uncles, cousins. It was a cascade of quiet, digital betrayals. I held on to one last sliver of hope. My parents. They wouldn't. They couldn't. They were my mother and father. They would see the cruelty of this and put a stop to it. My phone buzzed again. Mom voted yes. A sound escaped my throat, a choked, wounded gasp. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Mom, my own mother. I scrolled up, my vision blurring with tears, and saw her name next to that awful little checkmark. A few seconds later, the final nail. Dad voted yes. That was it. The hope shattered, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. I picked up my phone, my fingers fumbling, and dialed my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice unnaturally bright. "Hi, honey." "You voted yes," I whispered, unable to form a full sentence. There was a pause. I heard her sigh. "Emma, please try to understand. Carol was very upset. Everyone was, it's for the best. To let things cool down." "For the best," my voice cracked. "You voted me out of my own family, Mom, on a group chat poll. How is that for the best?" "Don't be so dramatic," she said, and her defensiveness was like a slap. "It's just one dinner. We'll see you after the new year. Carol just needs space. You know how she is." "I know how she is," I said, a bitter laugh bubbling up. "And I know that you and Dad are so terrified of her that you would rather throw your own daughter out into the cold than stand up to her for 1 second. Is that about right?" "That's not fair, Emma," my dad's voice cut in. He must have been on speakerphone. "We're trying to keep the peace." "There is no peace." I was practically shouting now, tears streaming down my face. "There is only Carol and what Carol wants. And today she wanted me gone. And you both agreed. You clicked the button. I hope you all have a wonderful, harmonious Christmas." I hung up the phone before they could reply. I slid out of my chair and onto the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The notifications on my phone had stopped. The vote was over. It was official. I was an outcast, exiled by a digital poll, and the deepest wounds came from the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. In the silence of my apartment, the reality of what they had done began to sink in, a crushing weight that felt impossible to bear. The month between the vote and Christmas was the quietest, loneliest period of my life. The family group chat, once a constant stream of banal updates and photos, fell silent on my phone. I knew they were still talking, of course. They had probably created a new chat, Family Circle, No Emma, where they could plan the holiday festivities without the inconvenience of my presence. The silence was a constant, screaming reminder of my exile. I threw myself into my work, hoping the deadlines and design briefs could build a wall around my grief. For hours at a time, it worked. I would get lost in color palettes and typography, my mind focused on the clean, logical world of pixels and vectors. But eventually, I would have to take a break. I'd walk to the kitchen to make tea, and the quiet of my apartment would rush in to meet me. In those moments, the wall would crumble, and I'd find myself replaying my father's words. "That's not fair, Emma." Or my mother's, "Don't be so dramatic." They hadn't called back after I hung up on them. Not once. Their betrayal was a solid, unmoving thing, a new piece of furniture in the room of my life that I kept bumping into. I felt a profound sense of loss that went deeper than just missing a holiday meal. It felt like my entire childhood, my entire understanding of my family, had been a lie. Their love, it turned out, was conditional. The condition was that I never, ever upset Aunt Carol. One evening, about a week before Christmas, I was scrolling through social media when a photo from my cousin Mark popped up. It was a picture of him and his parents, along with Carol and her family, at a Christmas tree farm. They were all smiling, holding mugs of hot chocolate, bundled in festive scarves. The caption read, "Pre-Christmas fun with the best family a guy could ask for." My parents were there, standing slightly off to the side, my mom's arm linked through my dad's. They were smiling, too. I stared at the picture until the smiling faces blurred into a meaningless collage of color. They were having fun. They were moving on. My absence wasn't a gaping wound. It was a minor inconvenience that had already been smoothed over. I was a problem that had been solved. I closed the app and cried until my head throbbed, mourning the family I thought I had. The one exception to the suffocating silence was my grandpa Arthur. He called me 3 times during those lonely weeks. The first time his name flashed on my screen, my stomach twisted in knots. I was sure he was calling to lecture me, to tell me I needed to apologize to Carol and smooth things over. I almost didn't answer. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Emma girl," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "How are you doing?" There was no judgment in his tone, no hint of the family drama. It was just Grandpa. "I'm okay, Grandpa," I lied. "Good, good," he said. "Listen, I'm having trouble with my computer again. It's making a funny noise, like a little bird is trapped in there." For 20 minutes, he had me walk him through diagnosing the sound. It was a failing fan. And he told me a long, rambling story about a barn swallow that had made a nest in his workshop rafters back in 1978. He never once mentioned the vote, my parents, or Aunt Carol. When he hung up, I felt a small, fragile sense of relief. It was a normal conversation in a world that had become completely abnormal. He called again a week later to ask me what kind of wood would be best for making a picture frame. He was thinking of taking up a new hobby. He asked about my latest design project, and I found myself telling him all about it, my voice animated for the first time in weeks. We talked for half an hour about the merits of maple versus oak. His final call came on Christmas Eve. "Just wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas, Emma girl," he said. "Merry Christmas, Grandpa," I said, my throat tight with emotion. "I wish I could be there to see you tomorrow." "Ah well," he said, and there was a strange pause. "Things have a way of working out. You take care of yourself, you hear, be good." "I will, Grandpa," I said. "I love you." "I love you too," he replied and hung up. I sat there, holding the phone, a deep sense of foreboding mixing with the warmth of his words. His calls had been my only lifeline, moments of normalcy in a sea of isolation. He was the only one who had reached out, the only one who had treated me like I was still a person, still his granddaughter. I didn't understand why he wasn't angry with me like the others, but I was so grateful for it. As I prepared to spend Christmas Day alone, I held onto the memory of his voice, the only proof I had that I hadn't been completely and utterly forgotten. I woke up on Christmas morning to the sound of silence. Not the peaceful, sleepy silence of a holiday morning, but a deep, resonant emptiness that filled every corner of my small apartment. Outside, a light snow was falling, blanketing the city in a clean white sheet. It looked like a postcard, a perfect Christmas scene. Inside, it felt like a vacuum. Usually, on Christmas morning, I'd be woken by a call from my mom, her voice buzzing with excitement, telling me not to be late for brunch at Grandpa's. The day would be a whirlwind of organized chaos, presents, food, noise, and the low-level stress of navigating family dynamics. For the first time in my 29 years, there was none of that. There was only me. I made a pot of coffee and sat on my sofa, wrapped in a blanket. I had nowhere to be, no one to see. The Christmas tree I had decorated out of a sense of stubborn defiance blinked its cheerful lights at me, a stark contrast to my mood. I thought about them, all of them, gathered at Grandpa's house. I could picture it perfectly. The long dining table, laden with my mom's honey-glazed ham and my aunt's famous green bean casserole. The mountain of presents under the tree. The sound of my cousins, children laughing and shrieking as they tore open their gifts. And in the middle of it all would be Aunt Carol, presiding over the festivities like a queen. She would be glowing, vindicated. The source of disharmony had been removed, and her perfect Christmas was proceeding as planned. I imagined them raising a toast, their glasses clinking, celebrating the peace they had achieved at my expense. Would anyone mention my name? Maybe my mom would feel a brief pang of sadness as she set the table and realized she was one plate short. Maybe my dad would have a fleeting moment of guilt. But then one of the kids would do something cute, or Carol would tell a funny story, and the moment would pass. My absence wasn't a hole in the fabric of their day. It was, at most, a loose thread they had already snipped off. The thought was a fresh wave of grief. To distract myself, I turned on the TV and put on an old, cheesy Christmas movie. I made myself a plate of toast and tried to get invested in the predictable plot of a big city executive falling in love with a small-town baker. But every scene of a happy family gathered around a fire felt like a personal attack. Around noon, my phone buzzed. For a wild, hopeful second, I thought it might be my mom or dad, caving and calling to wish me a Merry Christmas. But the text was from Chloe. "Merry Christmas, Emma, I'm so sorry. I left your present with Grandpa." My heart ached for her. She was just a kid, caught in the crossfire. She shouldn't have to apologize for my family's cruelty. "Merry Christmas, Chloe," I typed back. "It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. Go enjoy your day, and thank you." The brief exchange left me feeling even more alone. I turned off the TV and decided to do the one thing that always cleared my head: clean. I scrubbed my kitchen until the counters shone. I vacuumed the entire apartment. I organized my closet. I did anything and everything I could to create noise and motion, to fight back against the oppressive stillness. As evening approached, I ordered a pizza. Eating pepperoni pizza out of a cardboard box on Christmas Day felt like the ultimate symbol of my exile. As I sat there, chewing mechanically, I thought about the chair at Grandpa's table. My chair. It would be empty. Or worse, maybe they had just removed it, rearranged the seating so there wouldn't even be a space to mark my absence. They had literally and figuratively voted me off the island, and now they were erasing any evidence I had ever been there at all. I looked at my phone, at the picture of my family at the tree farm, there. Smiling, happy faces. I had stood up for what was right. I had defended a young girl's dream against the cynicism of an adult bully, and this was my reward: isolation, an empty apartment, a pizza for one. As the snow continued to fall outside my window, I had never felt so righteous, and I had never felt so completely and utterly alone. My solitary Christmas pizza was half-eaten when my phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed a name I didn't expect to see: Grandpa Arthur. My first thought was that something was wrong, that someone was sick. I answered immediately. "Grandpa, is everything okay?" "I'm on my way, Emma girl," he said. His voice was steady, but there was an unusual energy in it, a current of something powerful running just beneath the surface. On your way where? What's going on?" I asked, confused. I could hear the sound of a car engine. "I'm coming to your apartment. Put on a pot of coffee. I'm about 10 minutes out," he said. "We're going to have our own Christmas dinner." And then he hung up. I sat there stunned, the phone still pressed to my ear. What had just happened? He had left. He had left his own Christmas dinner, the one he hosted every single year. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. I cleaned up the pizza box, smoothed the blanket on the sofa, and put on the coffee, my hands moving on autopilot. A maelstrom of emotions was swirling inside me: confusion, fear, and a tiny, flickering flame of hope. True to his word, 10 minutes later my buzzer rang. I buzzed him in, my heart pounding, and opened my apartment door. There he was, my Grandpa Arthur, standing in the hallway in his thick winter coat, a dusting of snow on his shoulders. He was holding 2 grocery bags. "Merry Christmas," he said, stepping inside and handing me the bags. They were warm. I peeked inside one. It was full of Tupperware containers. I could smell ham and roasted potatoes. "Grandpa, what did you do?" I whispered, looking at his face. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear and bright. There was no sadness in them, only a deep, unwavering resolve. "I did what needed to be done a long time ago," he said, taking off his coat. He walked over to my little dining table and started unpacking the food. "They can sit there in my house and enjoy their peace. You and I will eat here." As we sat at the table, surrounded by the pilfered Christmas feast, he told me what had happened. He spoke in his usual calm, measured way, but the story he told was one of a quiet, devastating explosion. He said the dinner had been exactly as I'd imagined. The food was plentiful, the mood was festive, and my absence was a non-topic. Carol was in her element, telling a long story about a difficult real estate deal she had brilliantly closed. Everyone was hanging on her every word. When she finished, and the polite laughter died down, Grandpa Arthur stood up, holding his water glass. Everyone assumed he was going to give his traditional Christmas toast, he told me, a small, wry smile on his lips. I'd like to say a few words, he had announced to the table. The room fell silent. This holiday is about family, and I've been sitting here thinking about what that word really means. To some, it seems to mean agreement, conformity, keeping up appearances. He had let his eyes drift over to Carol, then to my father. But that's not what it means to me, he continued, his voice growing stronger. Family means loyalty. It means supporting each other, especially when it's hard. It means having integrity. He put his glass down. I want to tell you all a story. It was about 15 years ago. My carpentry business had hit a rough patch. A big client went bankrupt and didn't pay me. I was on the verge of losing everything, including this very house. I was too proud to ask for help, but my children, he paused, looking directly at my father and then at Carol, were too busy with their own successful lives to notice their old man was sinking. He told me the table had gone utterly still. No one dared to breathe. But someone did notice, Grandpa said, his voice softening. A 14-year-old girl noticed. She saw the worry on my face. She saw the stack of unpaid bills on my desk. And without saying a word to anyone, she went out and got an after-school job bagging groceries at the supermarket. Every Friday, she would come to my house, telling me she was just stopping by to say hello. And every Friday, she would slip her week's earnings, maybe $40 or $50, everything she had, into the pocket of my work coat hanging by the door. He paused, and his eyes met mine across my small dining table. I felt the tears welling up, my throat closing. I had forgotten about that, pushed it away as just a small thing a kid does for a grandpa she loves. That little girl's money didn't save my business, he had told the silent room. But it did more than that. It saved me. It reminded me what real love and real loyal tie looked like. It wasn't about big, important careers or fancy cars. It was about showing up when someone needs you. He let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. That little girl, of course, was Emma. A collective gasp had gone through the room. My mother's face had gone pale. You all sat here and voted her out of this family because she had the integrity to stand up for her cousin. Grandpa's voice had become hard as steel. You punished her for having the very quality that I value most. You talk about respect, but you don't understand the first thing about it. Your loyalty is transactional. You've shown me who you are. And then he delivered the final, shattering blow. So I have made a decision, a final one. I've been thinking about my legacy, about what to do with this house. I'm sure you all have too. His gaze swept across their stunned faces. 2 weeks ago, I met with my lawyer. I have signed the deed of this house, free and clear, over to its new owner, the one person who has earned it, the one person who has always shown me what family truly means. He picked up his coat from the back of his chair. This house now belongs to Emma, he announced to the silent, horrified room. So I'm afraid I'm trespassing. I'm going to go have Christmas dinner with the owner of the house. I suggest you all finish your meal and see yourselves out. He told me he didn't look back. He just put on his coat, opened the front door, and walked out, leaving them all sitting there in my house, their faces a mixture of shock, fury, and utter devastation. Their perfect, harmonious Christmas had been shattered into a million pieces. My grandfather finished his story, and we sat in silence for a long moment. The gravity of what he had done settled over me. He hadn't just stood up for me. He had dismantled the entire power structure of our family with a few carefully chosen truths. He had taken Aunt Carol's throne and kicked it out from under her. He had given me not just a house, but my dignity, my worth, my place in the world, all reflected back at me through his unwavering belief in me. Tears I hadn't even realized I was holding back began to stream down my face. They weren't the hot, angry tears of betrayal I had cried for weeks. These were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming, bone-deep relief. Grandpa reached across the table and patted my hand. There now, Emma girl, no need for that. Let's eat before this ham gets cold. And so we did. We ate our Christmas dinner at my little two-person table, talking and laughing. He told me more stories about his youth, and I showed him the designs I was working on. It was the calmest, most peaceful, and most meaningful Christmas I had ever had. For the first time, I felt like I was celebrating with real family. It was about an hour later that the first frantic call came through. It was my mother. I looked at the screen, then at my grandpa. He just gave me a small nod as if to say, "It's up to you." I let it go to voicemail. A second later, a text message appeared. "Emma, you need to call me right now. Your grandfather has lost his mind. This isn't legal. You can't let him do this." Then a call from my father. I ignored it. Then a text from him. "He's trying to tear this family apart. Don't you see that? You need to tell him to fix this." Then the main event. A call from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew was Aunt Carol. I silenced my phone and put it face down on the counter. The buzzing continued relentlessly for the next hour, a furious, desperate swarm of calls and texts from almost every one of the 12 people who had voted me out. They were a mix of rage, disbelief, and a new, unfamiliar tone, pleading. They weren't pleading for my feelings, of course. They were pleading for the house, for the inheritance they had always seen as their birthright. I never answered a single one. My grandpa stayed for another hour before heading home to his now empty house, which he was leasing from me, as he cheekily put it, for the price of one pot of coffee per visit. After he left, I picked up my phone and read through the messages. They were ugly and revealing. They called me manipulative, cruel, and selfish. They accused me of poisoning Grandpa against them. In their version of the story, they were the victims. I was the villain who had stolen their future. But their words had no power over me anymore. Their opinions, which had once felt like the sun I orbited, were now just the distant, angry buzzing of flies. They hadn't shattered me. They had shattered themselves against the truth. Their foundation, built on appearances and transactions, had crumbled the moment it was tested by something real. In the weeks that followed, I learned through Chloe that the family had completely fractured. Carol and my father were barely speaking, each blaming the other. The arguments were apparently epic. The perfect family portrait was in ashes. I spoke with El Oyer, who confirmed what Grandpa had done was perfectly legal and ironclad. The house was mine. My parents eventually sent me a long, rambling letter, full of excuses and self-pity, ending with the suggestion that the right thing to do would be to sign the house back over to Grandpa so things could go back to normal. I sent them a short, simple reply. Things will never go back to normal because normal was the problem. This is my new normal. My new normal is quiet, but it is not lonely. It is filled with my work, which I love. It is filled with my friendship with Chloe, who has since enrolled in culinary school and is happier than I have ever seen her. And it is filled with my grandpa Arthur. We have dinner at my house every Sunday. We don't talk about the rest of the family. We talk about books and woodworking and the future. We are building a new family, one based not on obligation or appearances, but on the simple, powerful foundation of unconditional love and respect. So I have to ask you, the audience, was what my grandpa did an act of revenge, or was it an act of justice? He took away their inheritance, yes, but in doing so, he gave me back myself. And I've come to realize that some families aren't circles that hold you in, but cages that keep you small. Sometimes, the only way to be free is for someone to finally have the courage to open the door.